UK car makers claim leaving EV sales rules unchanged would cost jobs and investment. BMW, Jaguar, Land Rover, Nissan and Toyota lobbied against zero-emission vehicle mandate, documents show. Who's this? Jasper Jolly, Sunday the 24th of August 2025. Car makers claim that leaving electric car sales rules unchanged would threaten British jobs, which they already have done, and cost them hundreds of millions of pounds. Well, it's already cost £6.5 billion to try and find customers for electric vehicles in 18 months, according to documents that show the private lobbying for a slower transition away from fossil fuels. BMW, Jaguar, Land Rover, Nissan and Toyota claim that rules forcing them to sell more electric cars each year would harm investment in the UK, according to responses to proposed changes submitted to the government. The responses were obtained by Fast Charge, a newsletter covering electric cars and shared with The Guardian. Jaguar Land Rover, the Land Rover maker, said leaving the rules unchanged would materially damage UK producers' ability to invest in vehicle lines. The last Conservative government said last year that automotive manufacturers must sell an increasing proportion of electric vehicles each year or else face steep fines under rules known as the Zero Emission Vehicle ZEV mandate. But as I say, according to Colin, they did it last year and they're on target to do it this year. That's why they're all shitting themselves, because they're on target to do it. That's well done, Sherlock. Electric car sales have increased rapidly, accounting for more than a fifth. Electric car sales accounting for more than a fifth of the market in July, and every car maker complying with targets last year. Well, that's funny because Suzuki didn't sell one electric car last year. So how did they comply with targets? Not by selling them, but no doubt by buying carbon credits off Tesla. However, car makers earlier overestimated the demand for battery vehicles, meaning they've been forced to cut prices to attract buyers. Low prices are good for consumers. Well, they're not, because if you buy a new car and it bombs a fortune, it's not good for the person who buys it new, it's good for the person who buys it second hand. How many times do you think the person who buys a new electric car and loses a fortune is going to keep doing it? How long will it be before there are no bargain used electric vehicles? Lower prices are good for consumers. No, they are not. But the industry has argued they are unsustainable. Yes, they are. After intensive lobbying, the Labour government backed down in April, adding new flexibilities to rules that will allow car makers to sell more petrol cars. So flexibilities include low-emission petrol cars. The consultation responses reveal the detailed arguments that car makers made in private in favour of leniency, despite advice from the government's official climate advisor, who knows nothing about car sales. In fact, the Labour government, I don't think they know anything about anything. Angela Rayner, housing minister, just buying a third house on her MP's salary. She obviously knows about the housing market, doesn't she? Putting her in charge of housing was inspired by Keir Starmer. The consultation responses reveal the detailed arguments that car makers made in private in favour of leniency, despite advice from the government's official climate advisor that the changes could raise UK carbon emissions. The German manufacturer BMW said the UK had become worse for manufacturing since Brexit. I don't think so, but added that the ZEV mandate was much more radical and far-reaching than the equivalent rules in the EU or California. BMW, which makes Mini and Rolls-Royce cars in Britain, wrote the UK has already become a far more difficult place to produce vehicles now post-Brexit, and a further challenging market environment could ultimately damage competitiveness and have a detrimental effect on the 8,000 jobs, up to 50,000 with supply chain, we currently retain in the UK. Japan's Toyota, which runs factories in Derbyshire and North Wales, said penalties could amount to hundreds of millions of pounds for individual manufacturers, a level that could place employment and investment across the industry at risk. The world's biggest car maker by volume is focused on hybrid cars, combining a smaller battery and a petrol engine. and has lobbied successfully for hybrid sales to be allowed until 2035 in the UK. Its Japanese rival Nissan, whose sole European factory is in Sunderland, said car makers need more flexibilities or else face critical levels of costs that would divert money away from battery EV research and development in the UK. Jaguar Land Rover, which is the most British factories, complained that a rule that allowed car makers to buy credits from rivals whose electric cars were above target meant that British companies were subsidising rivals, particularly in China, which dominates electric car production. So they have an oversupply in China of 3.5 million. They export them to Europe. They kill us on prices. They're not as good as legacy makers. And the poor legacy makers have to give them more money. So they're subsidised by the Chinese government. They make these vehicles, they ship them over here, and then our lot, or Europeans, have to give them more money in carbon credits, which numbskull fought up the ZEV mandate. However, campaigners counter that the rules work by forcing car makers to go electric. Well, again, that would be people like the Climate Intelligence Unit. And to be fair, whoever came up with that name couldn't have got it any more wrong. Ben Nelms, the chief executive of New Automotive, a group advocating the switch to electric vehicles. Do they sell electric vehicles? New Automotive, did he sell them? Does their money, does their income depend on selling EVs? Or are they one of these like lovey firms? Non-profit makers? Who knows? Who are they? Whoever they are, they're wrong. The car industry's own consultation responses confirmed that the ZEV mandate's 2024 targets were met, proving the policy is a powerful driver of change. As I say, 2024, they spent $4 billion in discounts. Factories shut, firms went out of business, car dealers lost a fortune, loads of job losses. But here, Ben Nelms, proving the policy is a powerful driver of change. Let's put a ZEV mandate on people who write articles and, you know, aren't anything to do with the car trade, know nothing about the car trade, who would get shocked in a minute if they turned up in a showroom on Monday morning at 9 o'clock. By 9:30 they'd be in the toilets crying. They would be shocked, eaten alive in the showroom for coming up with crap like that. Obviously, no idea what he's talking about. The focus should now shift to accelerating the transition, as this data shows the UK automotive industry is capable of delivering cheaper, cleaner transport by selling it for less than it costs to make. Tom Riley, the author of the Fast Charge newsletter, said car makers love to wave the Union Jack when it suits them. Now don't forget the Union Jack, that's when it's on a ship. So perhaps they put it on one of those cargo ships that keep going to the bottom of the sea with a load of EVs on. Let me just read this again. Tom Riley, the author of the Fast Charge newsletter, said car makers love to wave the Union Jack when it suits them, but threatening UK jobs and investment to weaken climate policy is a cynical tactic. So they threatened closing the Luton factory down. It's just cynical. They just shut it down because they're being cynical. Mike Hawes, the chief executive of the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders, SMMT, a lobby group, said the automotive industry faces unprecedented challenges, not least the shift to EVs, against a subdued economic backdrop and fierce global competition. The ZEV mandate intensifies the pressure, with the timescale necessitating brands spend billions to drive demand. Now, do you get that? With the timescale necessitating brands spend billions to drive demand to achieve compliance by sales. The demand isn't there. So what they have to do is convert them from buying the vehicle they want with a heart to a no-brainer because it's so cheap. That's the only way they can sell them. UK manufacturers have consistently warned that this cost was unsustainable and would threaten further investment, which it has done. He said the government was right to change previous targets, which would have meant decarbonisation at the cost of deindustrialisation. A BMW spokesperson said the company supported UK and global climate targets, but added, "We believe consumers will ultimately determine the pace of transition to ZEVs, as mandates do not create demand." A Nissan spokesperson said, "We welcome the government's pragmatic approach to lower than anticipated EV take-up, including the introduction of consumer incentives designed to bring consumer demand closer to ZEV mandate requirements." All that will do, the government targets, the government grant, it's not a government grant, the government are diverting taxpayers' money from people like me, old age pensioners who used to get, a heating allowance. They've taken it off them and they've given it to people to get a new car that they can't afford. But it's not, it's money. It makes no difference at all. They knock it off the front end and it then destroys all the residual prices of other vehicles that have been pre-registered that didn't have the grant. So it knocks all those off. So that, whichever new car now gets this grant, it will knock the same amount or an equivalent amount off all the used ones that are already being pre-registered. So imagine how much that's going to cost dealers. This grant for new vehicles for private people is going to cost dealers, what, 100 times, 200 times, 500 times, the same amount in depreciation. But nobody's going to get it, even the person who gets the grant, because it'll be worth less when they come to sell it. So it's just money that's coming to the system that doesn't mean anything. They should have just left it alone. JLR and Toyota declined to comment. UK car markers claimed leaving EV sales rules unchanged would cost jobs and investments. They were right, because they know what they're doing. These lobbyists don't know what they're doing. The government don't know what they're doing. Let me put it this way, I think car dealers would be able to run the country better than the Labour government. And if you put the Labour government in the showroom selling cars, they'd never sell a car. They're that useless. Not even a gimme, a walk-in, can I have? They'd talk them out of that. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video. Bye bye.